Good morning, everyone. I think we'll start. It's past 11. We do have quorum, and those that are not in the room will join us very shortly if they haven't. And so I'm chairing here this morning, and I call the meeting to order, and welcome to meeting 101 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. Today's meeting is taking place in the hybrid format. Pursuant to the standing orders, members, of course, are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I would like to take this opportunity to once again remind everyone here that the meeting, we can't have screenshots or taking photos of your screen. It's simply not permitted. So we have the giant techs in today. We have 3 on Zoom, 1 in person. As an individual is Jean-Hugues Roy, a professor École de Media from UQAM in Montreal, Quebec to Montreal, Center of Countering Digital Hate. Imran Ahmed, the Chief Executive Officer. Digital Content Next, we have Jason Kint, the Chief Executive Officer. All 3 are on virtual. And in person, as you can see in the room, is Michael Geist, Canada Research Chair in Internet and E-commerce Law, University of Ottawa. So we have 5-minute statements, 5 minutes, and we'll start with Jean-Hugues Roy, the professor from UQAM, the University of Quebec and Montreal. So you have 5 minutes, sir, to address the Canadian Heritage meeting here this morning. Go ahead, please. Well, you're either on mute or we have a problem. Just hold on. I thought we ended these problems 2 years ago, but I don't know. We'll see. I was here in the room when you were successful with your sound check, so let me just check once again. So, Mr. Roy, we can't hear you. I tell you what I'm going to do while they're hoping to... we can go to the next. Yeah, we're going to go to the next. We'll get back to you in a minute. The Center for Countering Digital Hate. Mr. Ahmed, the Chief Executive Officer, you're up for 5 minutes, sir. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Loud and clear.
Great. Mr. Chair, members of the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all today. I'm Imran Ahmed, the founder and chief executive of the Center for Countering Digital Hate. I'm here to speak about the role tech giants play in our information ecosystem, how the design and business model of their platforms increases the prevalence of disinformation and hate speech, and how they behave in response to democratically enhanced oversight, enacted oversight and regulation. Social media companies are not, despite their vital role in public discourse, in the business of free speech. They are motivated by money, and it make that money by selling advertising space on the back of content that news publishers and platform users create for them for free. Meta and the other platforms do not want editorial responsibility for the content on their platforms for liability and financial reasons, because content moderation and editorial control require lots of resourcing. But in blocking the sharing of news posts in Canada, Meta is proving that they've always had editorial power and will use it indiscriminately if content threatens their all-important bottom line. Now, Meta's decision to block Canadian news shows that this company and others like it only take responsibility for the content on their platforms when it threatens their finances. This is why the Online News Act incenses them so. C18 compels platforms to negotiate with news publishers whose content they have profited from and whose businesses, some of which they have destroyed. Canada has been left in a position where Canadians cannot share news posts with their friends, family, and community. This decision is nothing more than a temper tantrum by a company that has shown itself at every opportunity completely opposed to governance by democratically elected governments worldwide. This year's Reuters digital news survey found that 27% of Canadians share news via social media and messaging. But now news is gone from Canadians' news feeds. So what replaces it? What content do users turn to now reputable news outlets have been shut out? That news vacuum
Rappel au règlement, Monsieur le Président. On a un enjeu avec l'interprétation.
Yes, Mr. Ahmed, just hold on. We're having trouble with French translation right now. I'll just talk. Sorry about this. We'll stop the clock. You still have 2 minutes and 40 seconds or so to go. We're just waiting. We've had some technical problems this morning. Everybody hearing translation right now? No, not yet.
En fait, sur la chaîne, sur le canal français, on a le son d'origine, donc on vous entend avec une magnifique voix, Monsieur le Président, mais quand même en anglais.
It would be interference with another microphone.
It's interference, so right now? Interference? Okay.
Monsieur le Président, l'interprète nous fait savoir qu'il y aurait un autre microphone d'allumé, qu'il y a une interférence avec un autre microphone et qu'il y aurait aussi un stylo qui fait du bruit. Alors, je ne sais pas si quelqu'un a un micro d'ouvert, j'en vois pas, mais il y aurait une interférence actuellement là.
We're having problem then, even with English translation here right now. Genevieve, you said there's a mic on, and I don't see a mic on. Can we suspend for 2 minutes, if we don't mind, see if we can get translation, both in French and English then, if we can? Thank you. For the interruption. Go ahead, though, with your remaining 2 minutes and 25 seconds.
Sorry, it was 2 minutes and 40 earlier, but look, I will get
sure,
through as much
240,
as I can.
240. Go ahead, it's 240.
I will simply get through as much as I can, and you may have to bear with me a tiny bit. My apologies. As I was saying, that news vacuum is being filled, and I'm here to discuss the risk that disinformation and hate speech fueled by these platforms' algorithms become the filler. Harmful algorithms feed the spread of disinformation. The design of these algorithms prioritizes attention and engagement to maximize the number of eyeballs on and the time spent viewing advertiser content. My organization researches the amplification of disinformation and hate speech by social media algorithms. Rather than giving people freedom to choose their own content, algorithms apply methods such as predictive analysis to promote whatever outcome the company determines will maximize its profits. I just want to repeat that again. Platforms' algorithms don't give you what you want. That's a myth. They give you what they want you to want. These highly personal, highly invasive systems have resulted in the polarization of economic, democratic, and social thought, and are correlated to a rise in radical hate groups, networks, and extremism. Algorithm and recommender systems are fundamental to technology platforms' business models. And this commercial sensitivity is one reason technical information about these algorithms is so hard to obtain. But nevertheless, we have shown through our research a strong relationship between algorithms and the promotion of conspiracist and hateful content and disinformation. For example, in August 2020, when Instagram added recommendations to its user experience, unsolicited content to users' streams to extend their time on platform, CCDH set out to understand what effect this design change had on the prevalence of misinformation and hate speech. In our 2021 report, Malgorithm, we found evidence this design choice actively pushed radicalizing extremist misinformation to users. So once a user exhausts the latest content from accounts they follow, they gave new content as extension of your feed, identifying users' potential interest based on their data and habits. So if they were looking at COVID-19 disinformation, it actually gave them QAnon and anti-Semitic disinformation. If they were looking at anti-Semitic users, they were being fed anti-vax and COVID-19 disinformation as well. Our findings illustrate how platforms, algorithms, and design choices can quickly lead users from one conspiracy into the next, from investigating questions about the efficacy of a novel vaccine to unrelated conspiracies like QAnon, electoral rigging, and anti-Semitic hate. Now, Meta owns, controls, and profits from the Instagram algorithm, which here was shown to amplify dangerous disinformation and conspiracies. So that's just one example of the malignant dynamics caused by a reliance on a revenue-maximizing algorithm.
Can you wrap it up, please, Mr. Ahmed? Yeah, your time's up. Just wrap it up, though.
And although it is too early to test all consequences of Meta's decision to remove news content in Canada, I can see no way in which the removal of editorially accountable news and journalism could possibly improve rather than destroy the quality of algorithmic recommendations or break this malignant cycle of disinformation that I described. Thank you very
much. We'll move now to Mr. Roy, or I don't know how to... Good. So 5 minutes, please. I think we have the technical issues looked after, so the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Merci pour l'invitation.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak to the committee. I have one observation and 4 recommendations. I just like to point out that recent statements by Meta and Google say that information has little, if any, value that contradict earlier statements. And there is a researcher who has well documented Facebook's efforts to convince the world's media to use its platform to distribute their content. They are trying to search for ways of encouraging that, and Meta often has tried to build communities, and there were efforts to create communities and informed communities, but Google realized that already in 2001 that this information could have a value, and so the users who went to Google and were searching for World Trade Center, for example, the crawlers, robot crawlers on Google, directed those persons to other information, and so the information is enriched by Google, and that has also enriched the company for 20 years. So I think with regard to C18, I would make, with regard to the use of online platforms, I think that as MPs with regard to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Section 3, which guarantees the democratic rights of Canadians. You could have a measure that deprives electors, if there is a measure that deprives electors of sufficient information to enable them to vote in an informed manner, that may infringe the right to vote. And this statement is based on a Supreme Court decision, Supreme Court of Canada, in 1996. And the blocking used by META is, in my opinion, such a measure. So the public's right to information is not guaranteed by the Charter, but I think that everyone would agree it is a fundamental right. And I think you would have an argument to require online platforms to provide Canadian information or forbid them from blocking information. And this would be my first recommendation. And Article 51 of the law kind of tends in that sense. But I would make a second recommendation. And both Google and Meta have said they're ready to finance a fund to support journalism in Canada. Great idea, except that it will now be up to the legislature to define the amount. And so it could be a percentage of the Canadian sales of online platforms that have provided Canadians with access to information over the last 15 years. But how could we calculate those sums if we have no financial information on these platforms? And so that leads me to my third recommendation. You no doubt know that in Australia they've been inquiring into online platforms, an inquiry that goes from 2020 to 25. And the seventh report was released yesterday, and Australia requires listed multinationals to provide detailed financial statements for their Australian subsidiaries. And so this information is collected by the Australian Securities and Investments Commission. And so why isn't that done in Canada? Why doesn't Canada have the same tools? And it's up to you to do that, to ensure that. And my last recommendation is that we collectively give ourselves more resources in order to protect citizens. Governments have the right to see how certain companies handle food or medicines. They have also given themselves the right to inspect aircraft, search travelers' luggage. And this is with online platforms, despite the positive ways of using these platforms, they can have harmful effects. Over the past 12 years, their inability to mitigate these harmful effects I believe the time has come for Canada to give itself the right to inspect what information these companies possess about Canadian citizens. And Google, they know, have information from Google, Netflix, Meta, everywhere. And I think that Canada should give itself the right to access these companies' databases and examine their algorithms. I know it's kind of the caramilk secret, but the well-being of Canadians supersedes the commercial interests of these companies. So that right should also be accompanied by obligations for the platforms to provide, again, while respecting user privacy, programming interfaces, the APIs, to enable researchers to study what's happening on these platforms, people like me and others, to know what information is, what and how this information is playing such an increasingly important role in the lives of Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move to our next virtual guest, Jason Kint, the Chief Executive Officer, Digital Content Next. You have 5 minutes. Jason, go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you for having me, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on behalf of Digital Content Next. DCN is the only trade group exclusively focused on the future of high-quality digital content companies that manage trusted, direct relationships with consumers and advertisers. Our members include more than 60 media companies and thousands of brands, including news orgs ranging from local to national to international, such as the New York Times, Washington Post, BBC, Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, Philadelphia Inquirer, and the Financial Times. I last testified before this committee in 2022 ahead of the passage of the Online News Act, which DCN enthusiastically supported. We're grateful for your considerable diligence in studying the imbalance in bargaining power with Google and Facebook. As background, I have nearly 30 years of digital media experience, including the first 20 running digital media businesses. During that period, I executed on a number of major commercial deals with the large tech companies. With antitrust lawsuits underway around the globe against Google and Facebook, the evidence emerging in these cases confirms what we've witnessed whenever one of these companies faces a legislative or regulatory threat to its bottom line. Today, I'd like to open by sharing at a high level the types of intimidation brought on by the companies. First, threats to legislation. As you know, Australia provided a roadmap for this investigation, legislation, intimidation tactics around C18. Much of the public learned about Australia's new bill when Facebook blocked users sharing of news for 5 days in March of 2021, just as vaccines were being rolled out. But maybe lesser known was that Facebook's plan was to block news during the most critical week of Parliament's deliberations. A brave whistleblower shared internal documents with the Wall Street Journal showing access at the highest level of the company before going underground for fear of their identity and retaliation. Just consider how much more informed lawmakers would be if that whistleblower hadn't been scared away from testifying. Second, threats to investments. The public may know Facebook significantly expanded their investment in the UK over the last few years, even moving a number of executives to London before shuttering its Instagram office earlier this year. But less known is what we learned through an open records request that Mark Zuckerberg had threatened to pull back investment in the UK at a time when Parliament was demanding he testify about questions he never answered, to this day, including to Canada Parliament, who went so far as to summon him. On a related note, it made global news when the company agreed to pay $5 billion to the US government to settle the matter in the States, but less known is that is the basis of an ongoing shareholder lawsuit alleging insider trading charges against Zuckerberg and that the company overpaid to protect its CEO. Third, threats to publishers and newsrooms. We've seen significant headlines over the years about both companies funding news projects and academic programs. Behind the scenes, the companies are able to leverage commercial relationships to suppress reporting on information considered sensitive to the companies. Those considered partners through high revenue programs or advanced access to new products are understandably much more reluctant to publicly criticize the companies. Google and Facebook also issue threats to pull out of news altogether. One example is the head of news at Facebook reportedly told Australian publishers that they would be in hospice if they didn't work with Facebook. In 2018, The Guardian and the New York Times reported on Cambridge Analytica, Facebook's largest ever scandal. But again, less known is Facebook's threat to sue The Guardian a day prior to their news report, which Facebook's own head of news said was, and I quote her as I was sitting immediately next to her on a Financial Times conference panel, she said, probably not our wisest move. Fourth, record spending on lobbying, including through proxies. Google and Facebook registered in the top 10 lobbyists in the EU and the US. In addition to direct employee and campaign contributions, there's a long list of groups who champion the two companies' talking points in return for significant funding. Fifth, the companies intimidate consumers in order to drive outrage, including by using their dominant gateways of YouTube search and messaging. This includes the oft-repeated claims that regulations will destroy innovation or end the free and open internet. In each case, whether new privacy laws, the EU Copyright Directive, or Australian News Bargaining Code, the internet never broke. Facebook often takes it a step further by suggesting it will have to charge for services or kill thousands of small businesses and millions of jobs. Mind you, the company makes tens of billions in profit per year, driven nearly entirely by ultra-high margin advertising. As you've witnessed firsthand, these companies use various tactics in a coordinated fashion to slow down or stop any regulation that would impact their bottom line. Fortunately, their playbook is becoming more widely known, and policymakers around the globe are beginning to take action. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Kent. We go now to our final person on the panel, and he's here, Michael Geist from the University of Ottawa. 5 minutes, please, Mr. Geist.
Great. Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Chair, my name is Michael Geist. I'm a law professor at the University of Ottawa, where I hold the Canada Research Chair in Internet and E-commerce law, appear in a personal capacity representing only my own views. I've appeared before this committee many times, but it seems necessary to expand on my standard opening by stating that I've never been compensated or otherwise received a benefit from any tech company in conjunction with any of my appearances, submissions, or statements on any legislative or regulatory issue. I don't think I should have to say that, but given the tendency of some to defame critics of Bill C-11 and C-18 as shills, I should be absolutely clear that my views are not for sale. Further, I should also be clear that criticism of Bills C-11 and C-18 was not opposition to tech regulation. There are real harms, and we need regulation. I recently appeared before the Indu Committee, calling for strengthening of Bill C-27 on privacy and AI regulation, and I have to say that I've spent much of my time in the aftermath of the events of October 7th focused on the alarming rise of anti-Semitism and the urgent need for action both offline and online that could include the much-delayed online harms bill. But since this study is about tech efforts to influence policy, I'll focus on that. There have been important studies and reports that chronicle tech sector efforts to influence policy. For example, the Tech Transparency Project has reported on Google-supported research which identified many papers and work from academics with links or financial backing from the company. However, the investigations identified virtually no Canadian examples. In fact, a search for any articles or reports from the project since its inception across multiple tech companies reveals very little involving Canada. If we consider the efforts to influence Bill C-11 and C-18 through lobbyist meetings, we just heard about lobbying, one organization leads the way. It isn't Meta, which had relatively few meetings on these bills, in fact, fewer than any of CAB, ACTRA, CDCE, or CMPA. It isn't Google, which ranked second for the meetings. Rather, the organization with the most registered lobbyist meetings on these bills was News Media Canada. It's important to state that if this hearing is about retribution for the blocking of news links in response to Bill C-18, I think it's misguided. The companies and many experts warned repeatedly that the legislation was deeply flawed. Now that the news link blocking has gone on for months on Facebook and Instagram without any apparent interest by that company in regulatory reform, I think it's pretty clear evidence that this was a consequence of the legislation and not a tactic to influence it. It was not a bluff, as many kept insisting. Indeed, I'd argue that, frankly, both of the companies were pretty consistent from day one in their statements about the legislation. In many respects, and we just heard about threatening to stop investment, in many respects, it's no different than Bell's recent announcement where it threatened to cut capital investment by $1 billion in response to a CRTC wholesale internet access ruling, or Stellantis putting its investment on hold earlier this year in Canada with the announcement of the Volkswagen deal. Simply put, legislation and regulation have consequences. If this is actually about addressing concerns around regulatory or legislative influence, however, the real issue isn't tactics, it's regulatory capture. On that front, there is cause for concern in Canada. On Bill C-11, there was ample evidence of regulatory capture as a handful of legacy culture groups dominated meetings with officials and time with this committee. The voices of Canadian digital creators were often dismissed or sidelined, including those from Indigenous and BIPOC communities, some of whom reported feeling disrespected or intimidated by department or ministry officials. The situation was even more pronounced on Bill C-18, where members of this committee indicated they were ready to move to clause-by-clause review without even hearing from Meta. And during that review, someone stated that online news organizations were not even news. This form of regulatory capture was particularly damaging as online news outlets were sounding the alarm over the risks of the bill and took the biggest hit with news link blocking. They too were ignored, and some have now stopped hiring or been forced to suspend operations. Yet News Media Canada somehow managed in the span of 5 years to obtain a $600 million bailout, the swift enactment of Bill C-18, and now an expansion of the labor journalism tax credit in which their demands were met down to the last penny. Now that is influence. Cultural policy is the bedrock of this committee, but culture isn't static, and it's essential that this committee and the department ensure that it avoids regulatory capture and provides a forum for all voices. Failure to do so makes for bad policy, and I have to say, raises the risk of intimidation, in which, inadvertent or not, it may be the government or this committee that can do some of the intimidating. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Geist. We'll go to our first round, 6 minutes. We'll start with the Conservatives. Rachel Thomas. Rachel?
Sure, thank you. My first question here is for Dr. Geist. As you know, there has been a complaint that was filed with the Competition Bureau. And this complaint was put forward by News Media Canada, the Canadian Association of Broadcasters, and the CBC. And this complaint has to do with Bill C-18 and the fact that Meta has determined that they are no longer carrying news links. Now, they made this clear well before the legislation was passed that this would be the decision that they would make in response to the legislation. However, these outlets that I've just listed, or unions, are now complaining that, and I'll quote, by refusing to negotiate with Canadian news organizations in good faith for the access of Canadian news content on Meta's platforms, and by blocking the news content on the platforms, Meta is denying Canadian news organizations fair compensation for their content, leaving them with limited resources to compete effectively in the news publishing market. This last phrase here, leaving them without the adequate resources to compete in the news market, would say that Meta served as a vehicle or a platform by which these news sources were being shared. That vehicle is no longer provided, and these news outlets then are saying it's hurting them. But the whole premise of Bill C-18 was on the fact that the news outlets were actually providing the value, and Meta needed to pay them. In this, it seems that they're making an admission that actually the benefit was found in Meta being the vehicle. Do you care to comment on this further and expand on it?
Well, sure. I mean, I think that, as many pointed out, the reality is that there were great benefits that came to the publishers from social media and from search. Indeed, that was the basis upon which, in many respects, this took place for a very long period of time. And frankly, what we have seen in the aftermath of the legislation taking effect in June, I think, really confirms that we have seen, and I don't think it can be understated, real harm with news entities talking about lost traffic in the range of 30%. There are some news outlets that have stopped their services effectively or suspended their operations altogether. And I think particularly notably, there has been real harm from an investment perspective in this country. We've had a number of entities come forward to say that in the current environment, given the way the legislation has been structured, investing in news in Canada, given that legislation, just isn't something people are apt to do given that environment. So I think it's caused real harm based on this odd conception that somehow driving free traffic to publishers, which was clearly of value, we now see just how much it was worth, somehow required compensation, which at the end of the day was all about creating mandated payments for links, which is why I know myself and many others were deeply troubled by the foundational elements in the legislation.
Thank you, Dr. Geist. I want to follow up on something else that you said, and it's somewhat related. Now, we know that the big broadcasters, Rogers, Bell, CBC, have a lot to gain from Bill C-18, potentially. However, we also know that those that would be the new and up-and-coming platforms that are based online, which Ms. Hefner referred to as not actual news outlets, I would contend otherwise. I believe that they're legitimate. They've actually been hurt significantly by this legislation, and to your point that you raised in your opening remarks, many of them have made the determination to not hire more employees because they know that they might be put out of business potentially by this legislation. In your estimation, why would, it's not fair to ask why. Sorry, I can't ask you to speculate, but I guess I'm just curious. Maybe you could expand a little bit on Bill C-18 was put out by the minister at the time, Minister Rodriguez, as something that was meant to benefit the little guy. It was meant to benefit the local newspapers, the ethnic media, the local media source, et cetera, which many of these exist online. Why did it end up in a place where it is benefiting the big broadcasters?
Okay, I guess I'd respond in a couple of ways. First, it ends up benefiting primarily the large broadcasters. The parliamentary budget officer tells us 75% of the money goes to the broadcasters, radio and television, largely based on the way it was structured. It went outside of the QCJO framework that we have around the labor journalism tax credit, which ensured that broadcasters, which are dominated by a handful of large players in Canada, would be the major beneficiaries. Personally, I think it was a mistake. I think that, at a minimum, if the goal was to support the core, what we would think of as newspapers or digital publishers, and that's where the focus of the legislation ought to have been. But I think there is an answer to your why. And I have to say, I think one part of the answer to the why is that many of the online news organizations weren't heard. You know, they were oftentimes not given opportunities, or when they were, whether at this committee or frankly at the Senate, at times they were disrespected. I can recall one of the largest of the independents that's operating in many Ontario communities, Village Media, appeared before the Senate. One of the questions that their CEO, Jeff Elgie, was asked by Senator Harder was, aren't you happy to see newspapers closing, because then you can scoop up some of the staff and enter into these new markets? The idea that online news entities somehow celebrate or welcome the prospect of the challenges that are being faced, I think such a total misread of where things are at. And so what we've seen in the recent months is everyone from Village Media to Narcity to a whole range of players basically screaming, this is causing enormous harm, and saying at a minimum, surely we need some sort of deal with Google, because otherwise the effects will be catastrophic, which one would hope will ultimately lead everybody to find some kind of compromise on this. But the harm here has been very, very real, and it was not just predictable, but it was predicted.
Thank you, Mr. Geist. We'll go now to the Liberals. Lisa Hepner for 6 minutes. Lisa.
Thank you, Chair. I want to turn first to Mr. Ahmed online. I found your opening statement very interesting. You said that platforms like Facebook don't want editorial responsibility, but on the same hand, they prove that they are willing to exercise that editorial responsibility by blocking access to news. And you say they only take responsibility when it threatens their finances. You called it more like a temper tantrum that they had. And what we've gotten in exchange is a rise in hate and extremism online. So, sir, what do you make of these arguments that we've heard so far today that, well, of course they've done this. It's a business decision. They told us they would do this. So this is what we should expect.
Well, I think that's the soft bigotry of low expectations that we've been attuned to expect from these companies. In a sort of twisted irony, my organization has shown that Meta has allowed state-controlled media in authoritarian countries to pay for advertisements containing disinformation. So in 2022, we published a report on Chinese state media buying Facebook ads to push disinformation about the conflict in Ukraine. So while Meta is punishing Canadian news publishers by removing their ability to operate on the platform, it has profited from disinformation content paid for by state-controlled media elsewhere in the world. The truth is that the platforms and Meta in particular, we have come to expect them to behave in the worst way possible. And that's why not just are these regulations, and I think that C18 has its value, but one of the things that we've urged to Canadian ministers when I've met them, and we will urge today, is that there needs to be a more comprehensive framework that surrounds these platforms, because ultimately, if they can find a way to squeeze out of taking responsibility, to retaliate against anything that you do try, they will do so. And that's why a more comprehensive framework based on what we've called the STAR framework at CCDH, safety by design, transparency of the algorithms, economics, and the content enforcement policy, real meaningful accountability to democratic bodies like your own, but also shared responsibility for the harms they create. The negative externalities of these companies are imposing an unbearable cost in our societies, whether that is destroying the news media industry or it is harming young girls and young children with self-harm and eating disorder content. So in all of those respects, I think that the lesson that you need to be taking from this is these companies will wriggle out of everything they can. They will act in the worst possible way. And that's why more comprehensive legislation, a framework, as your previous speaker said, is necessary.
I met with the McMaster University student newspaper recently, the Silhouette, and they told me that they're really struggling because they don't have a way, without being able to share on Facebook and Instagram, they don't have a way to reach their audience, the students of McMaster University, and they're finding that in lieu of getting news sources, the students are reading various opinions that are posted online. And I do agree that there are lots of great news organizations that only operate online. If people take my previous comments to mean otherwise, then it was just inelegantly stated. Of course, there's great online journalists, but there's also a proliferation of opinion that's not based on news or based on fact. So what do you take about those tactics? Mr. Ahmed first. That, you know, the tactic that pulls in an organization that doesn't even fall under C18. Student journalists, they wouldn't benefit from C18, and yet they're being caught in this intimidation tactic.
Well, I think this reinforces the fact that this is nothing more than Facebook literally vandalizing their own service in a petulant display of mock martyrdom, claiming that this is necessary for their business. How on earth could it possibly be a viable business decision to say that the students of McMaster University and the journalism that they're producing is in any way a significant threat to their bottom line, such that they have to withdraw their facilities from them? And I think it's in the petulance, in the sheer scale of their decision, and the lack of care that they've taken with it, that you can see precisely what it is that they're up to. Thank you for highlighting that.
Thank you. Mr. Kint, I'd like to turn to you with 1 minute that I have left. Maybe you could give us an overview of the sorts of court cases that we're seeing in the United States and what lawmakers in other countries are trying to do that's similar to what we are trying to do in Canada.
Thank you for that question. Yeah, most of the most interesting court cases are around antitrust and data abuse. So, you know, we know, and this was, you know, part of the study in Australia too, that the source of their market power and this imbalance in bargaining power is that they have access, Google and Facebook in particular, to all the data and the distribution, and they're the gateways. And so you're seeing new legislation and you're seeing lawsuits play out that involve that kind of integration of market power. And so I think that's relevant. We're talking about harms from Facebook blocking traffic. Yes, that traffic does have value to publishers, but the only reason that they're able to do that and get away with blocking across the board and have it exert so much harm is because of their market power. And that's what this is all about, is the imbalance in bargaining power.
Thank you, Mr. Kint. We'll move now to the block. Mr. Champoux for 6 minutes. Martin?
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you to our witnesses. I'm going to ask Mr. Waugh. Professor Waugh, you said earlier in your presentation that this might not be the best approach in the C16, and this is something that we may end up. And is this something that we could improve? I said it's not the best approach. That's all. But do you agree with me that this is one of the tools that we're trying to implement in order to ensure we have agreements with Google and other platforms? You think that it's an important thing to do? Yes, I think it's very good, but we can also go further. And I think that there's a complex party negotiating with everybody, and if it could be up to you as elected MPs to find mechanisms that could allow us to find ways of distributing information, but you're getting a bit ahead of me, and because when you maybe heard the proposal made by Quebecor to the CRTC that's proposing a 20% fund, which would be for journalism, and the cultural aspect of information. And this is something that could serve to change the situation? And do you have any kind of an idea how we could distribute this, or how such a fund could work, or what kind of fees could be asked? This is something that's very recent, that's just coming out in the U.S., where Google has to give $11 billion US dollars, but that seems like an enormous sum. I think in Canada we could try and calculate how we do it. I mean, we could maybe try and work with Meta, or perhaps 4 billion was mentioned, and trying to value the information. We've talked about $200 million as well. And I think it's very interesting that you're referring to this study, which is relatively recent, but there are figures that have nothing to do with what we saw at the beginning of the study of this bill, and figures that are much higher than what supposedly was the value of information news on these platforms. I mean, this is for Google as well, and that surprised me, because something you said with regard to the media, that we also always have to take all these studies with a grain of salt, because we don't have the information we need to make an exact evaluation. And isn't that the strategy of these major platforms, to ensure that their real figures are hidden, and we always have to try and search for them, and then they can also always get around our arguments, our questions, and when we try to decide how much of a fee to charge. I mean, that was my third and even fourth recommendation, to require. We have to be more demanding of these platforms to ensure for the Canadian branches of Google, Meta, and all the other worldwide platforms. If they have activities in Canada, then they have to provide information, and we have to have a right to inform ourselves and to look into their affairs. This is something we have to do for Canadians, and I mean, this is something that's very, very basic, and we have to give ourselves the means to get this information. And with your expertise, do you think that we were right to bring up the regulation of these digital giants, and rather than having bills and regulations sector by sector? Maybe we could do online information. Maybe we could do it for artificial intelligence. And do you think we should have inspired ourselves with the example of the European measures on digital services? Would it have been more efficient to have a big bill that would deal with all these areas, or maybe go sector by sector, bit by bit? And I think that here the journalists had need for funding, but I think it might be a good idea for the future for information in Canada. I think that with regard to Australia, for 5 days, Facebook blocked information, and then there's also blocking of information by Google in Canada. So, and I think that there are a lot of accounts and websites that take information and then add information, misleading information. So Facebook without information would be much more toxic, I think.
For time, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Champoux. We move to the New Democratic Party. Mr. Julian Peter, for 6 minutes, please.
Thanks to all our witnesses. And Mr. Ahmed, I'd like to start with you. You're a hero to so many of us for the work that you've done in exposing some of the unbelievably toxic practices of the web giants. The report, Malgorithm, that the Center for Countering Digital Hate issued is frightening and it is disturbing. You speak of Meta basically forced feeding misinformation about COVID, about election denial, about QAnon, profoundly disturbing information. We know that in states and provinces where there was a lower vaccination rate, that more people died. We know that people died in Washington. There have been violence linked to QAnon. Can you tell us if you see a link between that real-world violence and the kind of irresponsible, toxic practices that Meta and X are engaged in?
Well, quite clearly, yes. When people see content more often, there's a simple frequency bias in our psychology that we believe it's more likely to be true. And when platforms are force feeding disinformation to people through their news feed, which is an act of publishing, this myth that what you see is the content of 1 billion people. Of course you don't. You see a timeline that's structured specifically for you. This is not a global discourse. This is a discourse that's controlled by algorithms, which are designed for commercial impact. And of course, they led directly to people. You saw again and again in the witness testimony of people who were charged with crimes relating to the January the 6th insurrection and the Capitol about 4 blocks down from my house here. Or it's the testimony of my friends and my colleagues who work in the medical profession who told me about people who were choking to death in ICUs, begging for a vaccine that they had once thought would harm them, and that it was now too late to administer. And many of those people went on to die. So there are human beings, there are tragedies, there are families today bereft because directly of the disinformation that was pumped actively as an act of deliberate publishing to people. There are people today in terror attacks that we know have been victims of terror attacks, their families. I was speaking in Pittsburgh at the Tree of Life Synagogue quite recently, and again, we see the effect of, these conspiracy theories being force-fed to people such that they think it is acceptable and normal, and that other people would approve that they killed people because of the God they worship or who it is that they choose to love.
You reference the anti-Semitic killings at the Tree of Life. I'll reference the Islamophobic killings in London, Ontario, and Quebec City, homophobic killings in Colorado Springs, the racist killings in Buffalo, New York, and Charleston, South Carolina. We can go on and on. I note that in 2022, every single ideologically motivated mass murder in North America was provoked by far-right terrorism. And so that is a clear and present danger to our democracy. Now, the Anti-Defamation League and the Southern Poverty Law Center have started their Stop Hate for Profit, which comes from Meta's unbelievably irresponsible actions. I would like to ask you, Mr. Ahmed, Canada subsidizes Meta and Google indirectly by providing massive subsidies, over $1 billion a year, for businesses to advertise on Meta. It's a tax write-off. The Canadian taxpayer picks up the tab for Meta and Google. Do you believe that that is a responsible action to so heavily subsidize companies that are engaged in that deliberate fomentation of hate? And to what extent can we push back against anti-Semitism and Islamophobia by ending that massive subsidy to these companies?
Well, Peter, thank you so much for the words you said earlier on about the work that we do at CCDH. Just to be clear, we're around 25 people with about $2.5 million a year in revenue. Now, think about the fact that we do that research that is innovative and provides you with insights that you're not getting from these companies that you provide $1 billion a year to in subsidies, and that they can't be bothered to do the basic work that we are doing to check whether or not their platforms are safe across a number of different areas of harm. And it is, frankly, outrageous that these companies have been able to get away for so long with things like government-related governmental subsidies, and you're not the only country that does so. And with the acclaim that their founders and people like Mr. Zuckerberg and Mr. Musk receive, while at the same time failing to do the basics necessary that are being filled in by civil society, funded by philanthropic donors and by members of the public, like the Center for Countering Digital Hate, and the work that Jason does, which, by the way, I just want to say he's another hero of mine.
Thank you. Final question for this round. You noted in your submission you recorded ads placed by Facebook pages controlled by Chinese state media and found that out of 50 ads, 88% were hidden from Meta's ad library after they ran. Can you explain that, please?
Quickly.
I really can't. Like, you'd have to ask them why on earth they took the decision to sweep away their shame under the carpet. But these companies, again, we see them playing ball with repressive regimes around the world, while at the same time showing a complete lack of respect to a democratically elected government such as that in Canada.
Thank you. We'll go to the second round. It will be a 5-minute round for the Liberals and the Conservatives. We'll start with Ms. Gladue, Maryland, for 5 minutes for the Conservatives.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I'm going to start with Dr. Geist. So, Dr. Geist, you may have seen some of my interventions here at Committee on C-18, where I did start by pointing out to the Minister of Heritage what had happened in Australia when Meta blocked news content, and asked him what actions he was going to take to make sure that didn't happen in Canada. And he said it was a simple business decision. And so when Meta and Google were here, I asked them if C-18 is passed in its current form, and if the government makes you pay for people to share news links, would it be a reasonable business decision to decide not to do that because you'd have to pay? And they both said that it was. So I was not surprised when this result happened, although the Liberals and NDP seem to be shocked and surprised. It looks like it's had very negative impacts on small and local businesses, which was the whole point of trying to have C-18 protect local small news outlets. So were you surprised, and what do you think the impacts have been?
Thanks for the question. No, I wasn't surprised. I appeared before this committee a couple of times on C-18, and I thought that if you understood the business model that existed, and we've heard a lot of the negative aspects of the business model, which is why I think there is a role to play for regulation when it comes to some of kind of the harms that have been articulated. But that wasn't what C-18 was about. If you understood the business model of trying, as we've heard, to keep people on the platform and capture information and deliver ads to them, the idea that news content was something they couldn't live without never made much sense. I mean, the reality is that's the sort of content that actually sends people away off the site. And so, given what had been taking place, it seemed to me that this was likely to occur. I also have to say, sometimes it felt as if people didn't fully think through some of the implications. I mean, with all respect, it was this committee that established a specific exception for campus broadcasters to include them in the legislation. And we just heard today that, well, campus news isn't included. Literally, this committee included it within one of its amendments so that they would be eligible under the system. And so it's also this committee that passed legislation that said all news, facilitating access to all news, whether in Canada or anywhere, brings you within the scope of being a digital news intermediary. You could have made the choice to say only that news that's from a qualified Canadian journalism organization, only those who qualify for payments, which actually would have excluded some of these other entities and would have excluded many of the foreign entities. But that wasn't the choice that was made. And so it seems to me these were the choices made in the legislation, and the outcomes were pretty predictable.
Thank you. It appears that there are even more harms coming from the way C-18 was implemented than expected. You may have seen the Substack from my colleague Michelle Rumpel-Garner yesterday, where she expressed concern about how the rollout of C-18 was going to impact especially diasporas and ethnic small media. Could you comment on what you think the impacts have been of C-18 on them?
Yeah, I'm actually, with your permission, I'd like to expand that, not just to C-18, but C-11 as well. One of the real concerns with the legislative approach that this committee, that the legislation has taken on both the Streaming Act and on the News Act, has been to have significant negative implications for access to foreign content for diaspora communities. I think one of the real fears of what we're seeing play out at the CRTC is the likelihood with the increased cost of registration, but even more than registration, actual costs of regulation, could well lead many foreign streaming services to simply block the Canadian market because it doesn't become economic anymore, and it's particularly those communities that may be most directly affected. Same is true on the news side. So yes, this was a likely outcome. And again, I'm going to come back to my opening remarks to emphasize, if you weren't listening to these players, if you decided all you needed to do was by and large listen to News Media Canada and a few other cheerleaders, then you'd miss that large story.
Let's go there for a minute. You said that News Media Canada was the biggest lobbyist on this bill, yes, and that they got everything that they wanted. And we saw immediately after C-18 was passed, Bell Media decided to shut down over 1,200 news outlets that were local. Metro followed suit. And so it looks at the end of the day that C-18 utterly failed to meet its objective, and rather lobbyists and the CBC and Bell and Rogers ended up with the lion's share of the taxpayers' money. Would you agree with that?
Well, I'd say nobody's ended up with anything right now. And, there is certainly some hope that there may be a deal with Google. And if there is one, then there is some revenue. But I have to say that given what seems to be a permanent position where Facebook and Meta and Instagram will not be coming back into the news market under this current environment, it's going to be very hard to make up the damage that's been caused by this legislation already, which I think helps explain what we just saw in the fall economic statement, which was the $129 million, supplementing and more than doubling what's available per journalist as part of the labor journalism tax credit.
Thank you, Mr. Geist. We'll move to the Liberals for 5 minutes. Michael Coteau. Michael.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. My first question is to Mr. Ahmed. Thank you for being here, and I was really compelled by many of the things you said in your opening statement. I wanted to ask you over if you could give us basically a perspective on the trajectory of hate over the last decade, and we've seen a substantial growth of online hate from your perspective, and how larger platforms have contributed to those milestones within that trajectory of potential growth or decline of online hate.
Sure. So, observations on the actual metrics. I mean, clearly there's been a substantial rise in online hate, and that is clearly having an offline effect. And by this point, when I started CCDH in 2016, it was somewhat controversial to say that what was happening online was having online impacts. I kept being told I was crazy for saying that, but by now there's no one arguing that. What we are seeing, however, is an increase in the normalization. So the fringe ideologies being mainstreamed through the algorithmic action of companies trying to put the most engaging, controversial, chewy content into as many timelines as possible. So the normalization of fringe concepts. Second, we are seeing an increase in the volume of hateful content, which is actually having an impact on BIPOC communities, on LGBTQ plus communities, because I'm brown. I wouldn't go out in my streets in Washington, D.C. if people screamed abuse at me every time I went out. I'd just stay at home. And it's the same with social media platforms. Who on earth wants to go onto a platform that's rife? As we found when Elon Musk took over X, there was a 202% increase in the volume of hate speech against Black people when he took over. Why would people want to post on that platform that is rife with people using the most offensive terms possible? Now, there's that. Second of all, we're seeing hybridization of movements. So because of that churning activity that I described with Instagram, with Malgorithm, where conspiracy theories are being cross-fertilized, we are seeing the development of new online first conspiracy theories. And I would argue the Great Reset is a very good example of such a hybridized conspiracy theory in which convergence between conspiracist movements and hateful movements is leading to new hybridized ideologies that actually is happening at warp speed. So it's making a more vociferous, a more complicated threat environment. And I'm sure that your national security people are telling you the same thing. And the reason for that is the companies, A, their algorithms, but B, their failure to enforce their own policies, their community standards that are our responsibilities as users, but therefore are our corollary rights to expect others to have to abide by them and for someone to enforce those rules. And all in all, it is, a bit of a mess.
So, I guess online hate itself is the spread of online hate actually is monetized by platforms, correct? Yes. Yeah. And do you think these platforms that participate in making money off of spreading hate have the ability to self-regulate, or has it gone past that point where there needs to be more government regulation in order to prevent this spread of all these falsehoods?
Could they self-regulate? Yes. Will they self-regulate? No. And by now, the indulgence of people who once were young, cool, liberal-seeming, San Francisco executives, of course they're going to try and do the right thing. I think they've lost the ability to claim that, the benefit of the doubt. It is time for comprehensive regulation, as the European Union has passed with the Digital Services Act, as the United Kingdom, my home country, has passed with the Online Safety Act that finally received royal assent a few weeks ago. I think it is about time that Canada joined, the rest of the world in promulgating legislation that will actually ensure that the negative externalities of these companies and their failure to think about safety by design, their negligent product design, actually results in economic disincentives that create a culture in which these companies start to think about the impact they have on our information ecosystem.
I appreciate your time.
Our world.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right on time. We'll move now to the block for 2.5 minutes. Mr. Champoux.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. On the same subject, Mr. Ahmed and Mr. Roy, the legislation in Europe and the online safety measures, as Mr. Ahmed said, and also the legislation in the EU. Do you think these types of legislation that are more demanding and have greater penalties, could they work well in Canada to prevent the online violence? Yes, I've always asked why the EU has done that, but we don't seem capable to do it here in Canada. It's up to Parliament. So. I hope you'll be back when we discuss this type of bill. Mr. Geist, you said earlier that lobbyists who were most consulted and were, for example, News Media Canada. And you're right to say that they were very active. It's an organization that represents 830 daily, weekly, monthly newspapers. So, I mean, it's quite normal, I would think, that they're the most concerned by the crisis and the domination of the media by other sources, and they're the ones that most require regulation, and so not only for digital enterprises but also for the more traditional news enterprises. Would you agree with the idea? And I've seen this idea recently that we should stop, and we should undertake a major study on the situation of traditional media in Quebec, in Canada, especially news media. Should we not have done that to have kind of an Estates General to help us better deal with the future? What do you think? And then the little time that's left.
The question. I would say that I think the time to conduct some of the kinds of studies you're talking about, to better understand the sector, to better understand the digital sector, is in many ways before you jump in with legislation. Candidly, even the title of this hearing seems to presuppose exactly what the outcome is going to be. As a researcher, typically I start with the question, conduct the research, and then come to the conclusion. The title of this study seems to have the conclusion already there, and now we're going to fill in the blanks. To your
Mr.
question,
Geis.
it's the same thing. Put it forward the legislation
Thank
and
you.
then study the sector. I think we should have done it the other way around.
Thank you. I gave you an extra 30 seconds, Mr. Shampoo. We move now to Mr. Julian, New Democratic Party. Go ahead, Peter.
Merci. J'aimerais poser ma prochaine question.
Thank you very much. A question for Mr. Waugh. Mr. Waugh, of course, we hear discussion of attacks, the Islamophobic and anti-Semite attacks that really happen in real life, and we know that there's a link between what we see online and this kind of act in the real world. Earlier, you said that we're currently subsidizing Google and Meta $1 billion a year, and this is the official figure. And what kind of tactics, intimidation tactics, are subsidized? And we have these platforms that don't respond to our questions, and the information they spread harms our society and can lead to violence. This $1 billion subsidy, it's the exemption under taxes. Yes, that's what you know. It doesn't make any sense. You say that what happens online has an effect in real life, and that's what I'm afraid of. That there are a lot of people, especially young people, young citizens. They live online on their phones, and the social media, and the fact that there's information excluded from what they have access to. I think if that situation continues, we'll end up with people believing that real information doesn't really exist, and the only thing that exists is influencers, and that really concerns me a great deal. And would you agree that the government should act to end this indirect subsidy, and we're trying to push Google and Meta to contribute, yet at the same time we're giving them a huge amount of money in indirect subsidies? Yes, absolutely. I had forgotten about the subsidy under the Income Tax Act, but that could be another one of my recommendations to eliminate this subsidy. We have to correct that situation as soon as possible.
Mr. Julian, to the Conservatives, 5 minutes. I have Martin Shields. Martin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the witnesses being here. It's an example of freedom of speech and freedom of opinions, and appreciate hearing them all. Dr. Geist, to start with, when we talk about supplementing to the metas, I think it's pretty well known that once the financial update came out, the Liberals immediately spent a lot of money, about 30 ads immediately up onto the big tech. NDP spends $2.5 million recently, have spent. Their leader spent $400,000. So I think we all are using this particular service out there, but I've got a lot of weekly newspapers in my writing, and they say the 30% they've lost from federal advertising went to the big techs. So what does the role of government have in news? Is it advertising? What role does the federal government have in Canadian news?
Okay, well, I'm not sure that I do track some of that advertising activity, and we do see both the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party advertising. I don't believe I see the NDP advertising. But what I will say is that this notion of subsidies being bandied about quite a bit, and I think that advertising by government is not a subsidy. Advertising by government is designed to inform the community, whether it's about COVID or whether it's about other sorts of issues or opportunities they have to take advantage of different programs that have been established or getting a passport or whatever it happens to be. These aren't subsidies. And it seems to me that what you want to do is to be able to advertise to the people where they are. And if they are on some of these platforms, then that's where you're going to advertise. You can make the decision not to do so, and we've seen that in the aftermath of Facebook blocking news links. But nevertheless, that I don't see that as a subsidy, nor, to be honest, this notion that deducting advertising as a subsidy strikes me as really odd. It's a deduction for businesses that advertise. And the idea that we would eliminate the ability for those businesses to effectively advertise in places makes them less competitive, it seems to me. I understand why we might be unhappy that they're getting this money, the big tech. Tax them. I mean, the solution, if you don't think they're paying their fair share, is to tax them, not leave our own businesses at a significant competitive disadvantage by saying that they can't deduct that kind of advertising.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. So with social media, removing it, the links, what, in your opinion, has that created in the Canadian landscape? Removing those things at social media that the links, they removed them. What did that create in our social fabric in our country when they did that?
Well, we've already talked about how the removal of news links certainly harmed many news entities from losing audience. We've heard from other witnesses about the concerns that filling that gap is hateful content or other kinds of content. You know, I think there have been some reports that suggest some of what's filled that space is frankly memes and pictures of friends and things like that, that it isn't that harmful side. But I do want to state unequivocally, because we have Mr. Julian's raised the issue of hate online and anti-Semitism. We need to be absolutely clear in this situation. I've been outspoken on these issues. I've been targeted by Laith Marouf on these issues. A year or so ago, a former member of this committee suggested that I was racist for raising questions around anti-Semitism. This is deeply personal for me and my community right now. We need action, and what we also need is true accountability with everyone willing to stand up and say so. And where that hasn't happened, I find it enormously troubling when those things take place.
So when you reference C11 and C18, who should set the standards then? Who should set these standards? Where do you think we should go?
Standards for which? For what appears on social networks?
Yeah. Who should set those standards?
Well, I think freedom of expression is quite clearly there, but it is open to the government to establish online harms legislation that provides guardrails and addresses some of these issues. I mean, candidly, one of the things that I have found most inexplicable about the government strategy is not that it hasn't decided to go forward and deal with some of these issues. There is a need to deal with these issues. It's that privacy was largely ignored or left to the end. AI has been moved forward without full consultation, and online harms has been left as a laggard. Now, I'm not saying that I want the government to come in and regulate everything people can say. I think there are real challenges around misinformation and disinformation from a regulatory perspective. But surely we can ensure that platforms are responsible when it comes to content that we already know is unlawful, terrorism content, certain kinds of hate content and the like. And for there is an opportunity, and it is a source of frustration, I think, for many, that issue has not been prioritized, but some of these others have been.
So that would go back.
Thank you, Mr. Shields. We're going to move on to the Liberal Party for 5 minutes. Ms. Dillon, Andrew, for 5 minutes, please.
Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. My questions will be for Mr. Ahmed. Have you found that Have you found that big tech companies cultivate friendly academics and experts, think tanks and advocacy groups to maintain the status quo and oppose regulation? We've seen in the past that the big tech companies try to resist and undermine and subvert efforts to regulate them. Can you please comment on that?
Well, thank you for the question. And we have seen an even more sophisticated version of the array of AstroTurf groups of paid influencers who support social media companies in their efforts to resist regulation, to resist having to take responsibility for the externalities of their companies. own work. But I think also even more importantly, they shape. I mean, look, they control the digital information ecosystem, and they've shaped that, and we know they have in the past to support that narratives that benefit them. So, I mean, I think the unprecedented power that they have to shape the narrative, the enormous amount of cash they have on hand to go and try and get others to help them shape the narrative. Yes, you're right. We are up against a really, really dangerous enemy in that respect.
My last question before I hand it over to MP Gainey is, what advice do you have for legislators, government, and just civil society in general to counter that? Thank you.
Well, look, I'm not Canadian, and so internal political disputes between parties in Canada are like watching my in-laws argue. I just don't want to get involved. But what I can say is that we are all patriots because public service is a job for patriots. Right now, Meta is trying to make a joke out of Canada and of the ability of democracies to be able to restrain the companies when they create harm in your countries. And I think as a patriot of my own country and as someone who supports the Canadian government, please do not see this as a setback. See it as a reason for more comprehensive legislation that deals with the whole array of issues: good data through transparency, meaningful accountability, shared responsibility for the externalities, and a culture of safety by design.
Thank you. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. It's a pleasure to hear from all of you today. Mr. Kint, I may engage you on this one. I feel like we've kind of left you quiet there. I'm curious, in all the talk of big tech, we hear about Google and Meta and occasionally Twitter, but Apple strikes me as also big tech and a company that we don't often hear about in the context of news. And yet the Apple News model, I think, has grown rapidly. It's simply a tool I use on my phone in my day-to-day life. How does that model work? How do you see Apple engaging with local news, their profit model, and why has it kind of escaped this discussion to date?
That's a really good question. Thank you for asking. Partially, as it's reported on there, Justice Department's still investigating Apple. So unlike Amazon, Google, and Facebook, they don't have a lawsuit yet from our Justice Department or our Federal Trade Commission or our state AGs, who are all suing the other companies in some form or fashion. I think that raises the attention level. You are right that Apple has choke point gatekeeper power. I think it's why the Digital Markets Act in Europe was so sharp and smart to include them, and it puts limitations on that gatekeeper power. And we are learning through in particular the Google antitrust lawsuit here in the U.S. that shared power between Google and Facebook, where Google is actually paying. Google and Apple, where Google's paying Apple, well north of $20 billion a year, and 37% of every single dollar that gets collected through their search on Apple devices is quite a choke point. And so these things are coming out, and I think we'll have more attention on Apple too.
Mr. Imran, I'm just curious, the UK experience with the online harms bill, that was quite a journey that I have followed from a distance here. Do you have any quickly lessons learned for us as we take from the British experience on that piece of legislation in particular?
Well, it really was a long journey. I was the first witness to give evidence to the draft bill committee in September 2021. It took 2 years to promulgate that legislation. I think the one thing that I will say is that the elegance of the British solution that says you set your own rules, but we want to see whether or not you enforce them in the right way, and about creating, and it's you don't need to make it more complicated than saying, if you act in a negligent way, enforcing the rules that we expect others, that you tell others that they have to abide by, and if that creates harm for our society, then we will impose significant economic consequences on you. And I think it was the comprehensive nature, the elegance of working within the platform's own community standards that they have because they need advertisers.
Please wrap it up.
Advertisers wouldn't advertise on there otherwise. I think that was what made that legislation so elegant.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Gainey. We'll go now to the third round. I think we've got time. 5 minutes for the Conservatives. I'm actually going to lead it off, Mr. Geist. The day that the online C-18 passed in the House of Commons, I found it ironic. Some thought I was a conspiracist, but the big broadcasters slipped over to the CRTC chair and said we want to do less local news. Isn't that ironic? Of course, no money has come yet. No money has come yet from C-18 to the big broadcasters, but they were preparing for that. And I can tell you in my city, the local television station does 2 hours a day out of 216 First Avenue North. I found that ironic. The day it passed, they went to the CRTC and said, we want to do less news.
I actually think that what we've seen take place in terms of broadcaster response, both on news and calls for reduced CanCon obligations, which we are also seeing now, does come out of this legislation. You know, it was on the CanCon, for example, it was an obvious consequence that if you were looking to shoulder for the international streamers or foreign streamers to shoulder more of the responsibility, that one of the responses you get from Canadian broadcasters is like, okay, we can reduce what we have to do as part of that. And on the news side, I suspect the timing may well have been a coincidence, but in terms of the amount of news that we might get from some of those broadcasters, there's been little evidence to suggest that the results that they might get from C-18, which are now pretty limited, it would appear, with only one company really now subject to this legislation, would change the trajectory of some of the things that those companies have been focused on when it comes to news.
Thank you. I'll move it over to Ms. Thomas. You got 3 minutes. Oh, Martin Shields, go ahead. Thank you. 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm going to pick up where I left off, and a little bit of preference when you said about C-11 and C-18 in your statement about maybe some people being excluded for a variety of reasons. And we've just heard it took 2 years for the UK to do the harms bill. And you suggested that we had to study backwards here on C-18 and C-11. What would you like us to see the mistakes that were made with C-11 and C-18 so that we got legislation that may not have been what it should, but we excluded people from the process? My idea is you talk to everybody and make sure everybody's heard if you want to get something right. On the harms bill, what would you suggest?
Well, I think one of the reasons we've seen delays on the harms bill is that I think it is rightly recognized as, in all likelihood, even more controversial than C-11 and C-18, and I think that's true. I also think that it never made sense to put it at heritage. I don't know why online harms is a heritage issue, and reports have suggested it has now been shifted within the government, and I think that's a good thing. Because I think this is much more of a justice and public safety related issue. I would say that what we really need as part of this legislation, and this may just sound like a naive academic speaking, is that there has to be an openness, a willingness to engage in an open, iterative policy process once it gets to committee. That the sense that making changes is not a mistake and it is not, doesn't suggest that somehow someone has erred, but rather is trying to make the bill better. And with all respect, I have felt that too often at committee, it is set up more as consultation theater as opposed to actually real engaged consultation, and that the notion of making changes, even significant, potentially significant changes, is somehow seen as an admission of some sort of failure when I don't think it is. These are not bills that should have been nearly as controversial as they proved to be. And I think that part of the problem was that from the day they were put forward, and this has been true for a long time with successive governments, both frankly conservative and liberal, the idea that once the legislation's put forward, any significant changes are seen as somehow we made some sort of mistake and that's a sign of weakness. And I don't think it is. Actually, I think it's the opposite. I think it's a sign of strength to develop the very best policy possible.
Thank you.
40 seconds.
And I think there's examples where that may have happened. I can remember when the current housing minister, when he and I were on a committee, and there was a word in there that was wrong, and I knew it was legally wrong, and they were determined to go, and I said, you're a lawyer. Look at that word and tell me it's right. And he said, oh my God, we've made a mistake. Let's fix it. And I think that's what you're talking about, that we should be able to do. But it takes a lot of people to be at that table through the time to deal with this.
It does. And you know, I know that there are negotiations that the public is not privy to where members around this table negotiate how many witnesses you're going to have and how long the hearings are going to go forward. And I think, to me, the starting point has to be not how many witnesses, but who do we need to hear from, who is most relevant, and knowing that, frankly, as part of, I thought, in the C-18 process, there was an attempt to wrap this up. I think it was after just four meetings, if I recall correctly, when there were a wide range of people, both supportive and critical of the legislation, that hadn't been heard from.
Mr. Geis. I got to move on to the Liberals for 5 minutes. Mr. Noor Mohammed, go ahead, Talib.
Thank you very much, and I really do appreciate all of you taking the time to be with us today. Mr. Ahmed, maybe I could just start with you. Obviously, what would be very helpful to us, if you might be willing to give us a written submission, given the amount of time that limited amount of time that we have. If you could provide us a written submission on how things are working or are not working, as the case may be, from your perspective in the UK. And if you'd be willing to do that, I think that would be very much appreciated. And yes, and Mr. Kint, if you'd be willing to as well. Would that work for you guys?
Well, I'm sure Jason and I would both be happy to, but just to be clear, it's a bit early. The legislation was promulgated a few weeks ago, and Ofcom is still in consultation stages, establishing precisely how it will utilize its powers. But, 2 years ago, we organized a conference in Washington, D.C. with lawmakers from Canada, the US, UK, Australia, and New Zealand to talk about legislation, and we'll be doing the same next year, so we can learn lessons from each other and how the implementation has gone a year on.
Fair enough. Thank you. Mr. Kint, if I could just turn to you, if you could just share with us, from what you've observed, how does the Canadian experience with some of the strategies that the platforms have been taking, how does that align with experiences in the EU and Australia and the US, I suppose, and elsewhere?
It's very consistent, and I think the only distinction, there's a lot of attention here on the loss of traffic from Facebook when they they moved early, frankly, to block all news. I think it's important to say that news was struggling obviously before C-18 was passed or before Facebook pulled out, and traffic is down from Facebook and Meta across the board internationally. And so this notion or this myth that suddenly something happened because you passed C-18, which isn't even in force yet, and that's the problem, is just kind of absurd looking in from and studying the international news market. And so I think you bravely passed legislation by looking at smart legislation elsewhere that's working. And so this is a short-term temper tantrum by Facebook, as it was described, but I think there's very consistent experiences. So a lot of the downstream kind of harms that are being discussed today, those are also very, very consistent with what we see elsewhere. I would strongly encourage everyone to take a look at the state attorneys general lawsuit against Meta for underage children being harmed by their platforms. It's 40 plus state AGs. It's multi-party in the US. So despite kind of the looking in at the US and thinking that we can't agree on things, there's very clear agreement on the harm that's happening and that Instagram and Facebook are not taking care of their products.
So, I think it's an interesting perspective, because we'd lovely to see a similar multi-party approach in dealing with these issues here, but obviously that's not necessarily the case. So, in talking about the tactics, in some of the tactics that you've kind of just talked about, one of the things that I'm curious about is the approach or the thesis that big tech sort of cultivates friendly academics, experts, think tanks, and advocacy groups to kind of push on the status quo and to kind of oppose regulation. What is your sense of that? Is that a fair statement? And what advice would you have to governments and civil society to push back on these efforts and to resist kind of that approach?
Yeah, 100%. On the research and academic side, I've seen very important researcher. There's a group at NYU here in the US that was blocked by Facebook from research it was trying to do because it was seen as adversarial as it tried to expose some of the harms on the platform. And then on the flip side, Google hosted Newsgeist in Canada as you were starting to look at C-18, and I'm fairly certain that some of the witnesses that have defended Google were at Newsgeist, which is a closed door, invite only Chatham House rule conference for a lot of academics and people in the news industry that covet that invitation from Google. I don't get invited, by the way.
Well, and with the remaining moments that I have left, I mean, there was an assertion made earlier that it's as a result of legislation that people aren't investing in news. I mean, it would seem to me that this is not a Canadian trend, but a problem that we're seeing around the world where there's less and less and less money to be made in news, and so smart investors just aren't putting their money there. How much of that would you ascribe to legislation that has not yet been in effect, enforced in this country, and how much would you infect the sad reality that we're seeing globally in respect of the investments being made in high-quality news and journalism?
15 seconds, please.
Yeah, no, the investment will go into high-quality journalism when you have competition on the actual platforms where they can't abuse the news companies by just sucking out the data and then putting in the ads against the cheapest content possible, which is often harmful content. And so you need competition, you need data protection, and that will help the news industry.
Thank you. We move to the block. Mr. Shampoo for 2.5.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. I find this discussion very, very interesting. And sometimes our questions are too long for the time left for the answers. So, and I would very much like to thank the witnesses for providing us with their analyses. And with regard to what we see now in the CRTC hearings, also the study of the current bill before us, and the situation of news is worrying, and I would like to suggest a motion that I'm going to read. Whereas there is a crisis in the media, especially with regard to the domination of foreign business. Many newsrooms have been eliminated, and hundreds of others could be in a near future. And three, that Canadian broadcasters, journalists associations, unions in the information sector, and a number of experts believe that urgent measures must be taken to allow for adequate and diverse news coverage in all regions of Quebec and Canada. That in accordance with 108.2 of the statutes, then the committee should undertake a study on determining the pertinence of holding an States Journal on medias, and that the committee define its parameters, and that there be a minimum of 4 meetings, and to make its recommendations known to the House. I would like to transmit this to the clerk in French, and I would now turn the mic back over to you. Thank you.
Mr. Shampoo, we have received this in French. We're trying to get it translated in English. It is relatable, so I'm going to open it up for debate, if you don't mind. Mr. Julian, yes? Point of order.
Mr. Chair, we have more questions for our witnesses. This is a very important panel. I would ask Mr. Shampoo to hold off. I think we can have a debate after that final round, but I have more questions that are very important, and unfortunately I don't feel that cutting witness testimony is the appropriate way to act.
Sur ce rappel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Julian, I've actually ruled that it is relatable. We are talking about the news industry here. You are bringing up this motion. It is relatable, but go ahead, Mr. Shampoo.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Je pense que j'ai le plancher, Monsieur Julian.
I think I have the floor, Mr. Julian. I know that we are still waiting for the English version. I have no problem continuing with questions for our witnesses, questions from the NPD, while we wait for an English translation. And at that time, we can discuss the motion, if you agree. I'm quite ready to continue with the questioning in the meantime.
Require unanimous support. So we're asking. Unanimous? The question is, do we continue on with questioning of our guests while the motion is being translated in English? It needs unanimous support. If not, then we're kind of at a stalemate waiting for the translation in English, which could take, it's fairly long, so if you don't mind me saying, it could take considerable time. I don't know that, but checking with the clerk, she has indicated it could take some time. Go ahead, Ms. Thomas.
Okay, so just for Mr. Shampoo's sake, I think clarity is necessary. Should it not be translated by the end of this meeting, then what happens with his motion?
So we could, two things. We could move to suspend till we get the translation. That would be one. And the other one is to adjourn, you were saying?
Adjourn and then bring back the.
We would adjourn and then bring back the motion.
Monsieur le Président, je vais prendre le risque de...
Chair, at the risk of submitting my motion next time, the translation isn't ready. I mean, there's no reason to stop the work of the committee. I think we should continue with questioning our witnesses, and I have a full confidence in the committee to not prevent me from representing my motion at the next meeting. Is.
No, I'm not hearing it on this side. I don't. So then I think we need to suspend.
Sorry, Mr. Chair?
Yeah?
Mr. Chair, I challenge your ruling then. I challenge your ruling.
Well, the motion was relatable.
I
It was
challenge your ruling. The witnesses are here. We've got questions. If the Conservatives are blocking again, that's their problem. But I would like to continue asking questions, and the best way to do that, with all the respect that I owe
We'll go to a vote.
is to challenge your ruling,
Thank
which
you.
allows us to go back to the questioning.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Julian. We'll go to the vote on the motion.
No, on
the
challenge.
On the challenge of the jury. Yes,
Yeah.
You're right. Go ahead, Genevieve.
So I'll just clarify for the vote. The vote is challenging the chair's ruling that the motion is currently admissible. So if you vote yay, the motion,
Le challenge, c'est sur la décision de suspendre.
Is it with regard to the decision to suspend?
It was actually on your decision to accept the motion at this time. I support the motion, and I'll certainly support bringing it back. But I challenge that because challenging that decision allows us to go back to the witnesses.
Okay.
Okay, I'm just going to turn it over to the clerk for understanding here. Go ahead, Genevieve.
So my understanding is that the motion was moved, it was ruled admissible, and that decision is being challenged. So the vote is on the challenge to the chair. If you vote yay, you agree that the motion is admissible, we would move to debate. You vote nay, we do not proceed to debate.
And we go back to the witnesses.
Okay, so Mr. Koto and then Ms. Thomas have their hands up. Go ahead, Michael.
It's okay, sorry. I'm okay.
Okay, Ms. Thomas?
I'm sorry. So clarification, though, it is totally not clear what is being challenged here. A unanimous consent motion or a unanimous consent was sought and it was not granted. Is that what's being challenged?
No, I am challenging
So instead,
the decision of the
excuse me,
chair
sorry,
to
Chair,
allow the motion.
My conversation is to you. Thank you. So then, Chair, the question then would be, sorry, the challenge then would be to your ruling that Mr. Shampoo's motion is in order.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And so you are saying, yes, it is in order. It is. Thank you.
Everybody's good?
So, can we call for the vote?
Okay, the vote on the chair's ruling, or challenge to the chair's ruling. Mr. Coteau?
No.
Ms. Dillon? No. Ms. Gainey? No. Ms. Hefner?
No.
Mr. Noor Mohammed?
No.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Ms. Gladue?
Yes.
Mr. Shields?
Yes.
Mr. Shampoo?
Oui.
Mr. Julian.
With apologies, no.
That is 4 yeas, 6 nays.
Yeah. So the motion's not in order, and we continue with questions.
Okay, so that means my ruling is defeated. We move on for 2.5 minutes. We will continue with our witnesses for, actually, Mr. Shampoo, you have a minute left.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vais en...
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to make a comment to the other members of the committee with all the respect that I have for the members of the committee. This makes at least 2 times in the recent work of the committee where a decision by the chair has been challenged, whereas this is based on the usual regulations of the committee. It's not an issue of interpretation of the rules. It's a question of the rules that are practiced and must be respected. And the second time that a challenging a chair's decision has been used to challenge the motion, and it's quite legitimate to want to continue with the witnesses. I think that the committee must be careful. There are rules, and the committee must be a master of its decisions. We're on a very slippery slope when we overturn a question rulings by the chair with regard to the rules of the House. And it happened a few weeks ago with a motion to adjourn discussion in the House end a meeting, and with another motion. And I would like to then have my disagreement and my warning in the transcript. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shampoo. Mr. Julian,
Sir,
for 2.5 minutes.
Point of order,
sorry. Mr. Noor Mohammed.
Just to register 2 things. One is I share Mr. Shampoo's concern that that there have been things that have been managed, and there have been moves in this committee that have made it very difficult for the work of the committee to be done. Mr. Shampoo was very gracious, I think, in offering that the motion be translated, and we continue. It's certainly disappointing that's not where we went, and I think it's important for us to recognize that it would be great for us to be able to ensure that things move in a way that allows us to get to where we need to get to, rather than obstructionist tactics that seem to be the way of the world.
Thank you, Mr.
Sur ce rappel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Shampoo, and then we're going to move on for 2.5.
Just with regard to what we've just heard, I know that the Liberals and the Conservatives are in dispute, and that's part of the rules of the game. And I note that it's the Liberals and the NBD that voted to overturn your decision, and I think the regulations and the rules as they exist should be what we follow. So, and I think that if we can continually overturn decisions from the chair.
Very much, Mr. Chair, and of course that decision was on the line, and the committee has the perfect right to make that decision. But I would agree with Mr. Shampoo that committee work means working often by unanimous consent, and I'm hoping that we get back to that. Mr. Ahmed, I wanted to come back to you, and I'm stunned to learn you have 25 members of your team. Please pass on our sincere appreciation for 25 people doing such remarkable work in the face of the big tech juggernauts and the massive increase in hate and disinformation that we are seeing. One of the things that can help to push back against this hate and disinformation is actually having transparency around online algorithms. Bill C-292 before the Canadian Parliament seeks to do that. In the United States, before the U.S. Congress, as I know you're aware, Senator Ed Markey has put forward similar legislation to oblige big tech to actually expose the algorithms they use to force feed, in this case, hate and disinformation to so many people. The concern with big tech, of course, is that they'll be liable if there is a direct link between the massive attacks that we've seen, the terrorist attacks linked by hatred, whether anti-Semitic or homophobic or racist, and their algorithms. There is a legal liability that is established. How important is it for Parliament, for the U.S. Congress, to adopt this kind of legislation to hold big tech liable for the egregious practices that they have?
Well, that transparency legislation is vital because without it, we can't actually create the arguments for liability. And so transparency is the absolute bedrock of an effective mechanism for accountability and then shared responsibility for any harms that are created. I think the European Union are also doing some really interesting things right now. They'll be setting up a new algorithmic study center in Seville that will be operating soon, and that will give us a lot more data on how these platforms are working, because let's be absolutely clear, the algorithm is the product. If you think that this idea that they're content platforms, they're not. They're an algorithm platform that publishes a timeline that's algorithmically ordered to keep you addicted. And I think that's what's crucial about the legislation you're promulgating.
Thank you very much. We've run out of time at 2.5.
10 seconds, Mr. Chair.
Oh, well, I have minus 5
Can you tell us
here.
more about Seville, Mr. Ahmed?
I'll be happy to provide something in writing to the committee.
Good, thank you. We'll move, the last two are scheduled for 5. Seeing the clock, I'm going to say 3 minutes each for the Conservatives, if that's okay, and 3 minutes for the Liberals to round out the third round. So the Conservatives for 3 minutes. We'll start with Ms. Thomas then.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Geist, with regards to Bill C-11, you made mention that Indigenous folks, BIPOC folks, and others who function within this digital space as what we often call digital-first creators, those individuals were not adequately consulted. You used the word sidelined in your remarks. Can you just talk to me a little bit about the impact that is having, that Bill C-11 is having on digital-first creators in Canada, and will potentially have on them going forward?
Yeah, there remains, thanks for that question. There remains deep concern, I think, amongst many digital creators about the implications of Bill C-11. Obviously, there's been a policy direction that has tried to assuage some of those concerns, but even within that policy direction, there still remains references to the prospect of dealing with algorithms and the like. So I think there are still some concerns, but particularly with the issue around Indigenous and BIPOC creators, there was media coverage with in one instance, Vanessa Brosseau, goes by the handle Resilient Inuk, who went to meet with heritage officials and walked away feeling completely intimidated and disrespected. And I have to say, I find such an incredible disconnect between what are legitimately a whole raft of changes in the legislation designed to support those communities and their creativity, and at the same time, the lived experience that some had within the legislative process, where the efforts to bring their concerns to the table, whether at this committee or later at the Senate, may have been sidelined. The Senate, frankly, heard from far more digital creators of all walks than this committee took the time to hear from when it came to Bill C-11. And that, I think, you have to do more than just have legislation that sounds good. You have to ensure that the groups that are affected have an opportunity to be heard as well.
Thank you, Dr. Geist. At this time, I would like to move a motion that was tabled and moved at the last meeting. However, we didn't have an opportunity to bring it to a vote. It's my hope that today we can bring it to a vote quite quickly and be onward. So just to read the motion into the record then, given that the Department of Canadian Heritage, under the leadership of the Honourable Pablo Rodriguez, approved anti-racism grants upwards of $130,000 to Laith Marouf of the Community Media Advocacy Centre. Given that on October 21st, 2022, the Honourable Pablo Rodriguez appeared before the Heritage Committee, during which time he was asked by a number of MPs about the date he was made aware of Laith Marouf's derogatory remarks about Jews and Francophones, and the Minister reported to the committee that he was not informed until after August 22nd, 2022. And given that an article by the Globe and Mail and an access to information request indicate emails circulated from the former Diversity and Inclusion Minister, the Honorable Ahmed Hussein, his former Chief of Staff, Minister Rodriguez's former Chief of Staff, and the Deputy Minister of Canadian Heritage between August 17th and August 19th, 2022, including one sent to Minister Rodriguez's personal email account titled Laith Marouf and Anti-Semitic Hate Speech. Given all of those things, the committee invite the former Minister for Canadian Heritage, the Honourable Pablo Rodriguez, to appear before the committee as soon as possible for no fewer than 2 hours to clarify his remarks concerning Laith Marouf, and that the committee report its findings to the House. Mr. Chair, I have read the motion into the record. My request is clear that we would hear from the former Minister of Heritage. He is the one that made the decision or signed off on the $130,000 that went to Laith Marouf. He is further the one who requested that that money be paid back. It has not been. And it is Laith Marouf that should have been scolded and had the money taken from him far sooner than it was by this minister, who chose instead to turn a blind eye. And so it is incumbent upon this minister to come to the committee and to explain to us why he made the decision that he did, or to clarify his previous comments. I move the motion.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. So I'm going to call the vote to move to debate. That's the correct. Yes, Mr. Koto, very quickly.
Yeah, so, you know, we were just asked if we would agree to an additional 3 minutes on each side. That was the request. Obviously, the member can move a motion whenever she wants, but like when we agree, like when we actually, as a committee, agree that we're going to provide 3 minutes to each side, you know,
we still might get there, Mr. Koto. If I
well,
can get this
you know
vote.
what? I'm sorry. You know, and I'm sorry that, you know, we have. You know, the only way this committee can work in the sense of working together is by, you know, honoring agreements that we make. And, you know, if I knew that we were going to, if I knew that we were going to get into a debate over a motion last minute, 4 minutes or 3 minutes before the end of the meeting, we wouldn't have agreed to extend.
Actually, Mr. Courteau, if you look at the third round, instead of 5 minutes each for the Conservatives and the Liberals, I made an editorial change of 3 minutes. It was still in the third round, but because of the clock,
yeah, but I
I
was specifically asked through the clerk, through the chair, if we were okay with that, and you know, I'm sorry. It's I don't think this is a good way for us to you know, to proceed. It's not the right way to you know, as a committee to operate. I just want to finish, Mr. Chair, if that's okay. Quickly. Yeah, like we, you know, every single week, actually twice a week now, we have witnesses that, you know, in some cases come from all across the country to come and provide us, you know, they're not being paid like, you know, members of this committee to sit here. They're actually coming on their, you know, their free will because they're interested in issues that matter to them and, you know, issues that they care about. And for them to come into this committee and first of all, lose the opportunity to fulfill their opportunity to speak on these issues, I think is it's not a great way for a committee to proceed.
Thank you. I am going to move to call for the vote to the debate. No, I mean, we've discussed this.
Are you saying that I can't continue talking?
No, I think the motion has
You've attempted twice now to stop me from speaking.
Yes, I have.
So why are you doing that?
Because
obviously you want the
no,
the,
it's
the
a
vote
dilatory
called.
motion, Mr. Koto.
But I have the floor, and we were. How much time have we sat here as, you know, members and listened to the member who's moving this motion for, in some cases, 50 minutes without being interrupted? And here I am, and I don't speak a lot at this committee. No. You know that. And here I am being told, you know, by the chair twice now to stop talking by you interrupting me. I don't think that's fair process. If you want to talk about fairness, then I think we should allow members to speak and actually.
A point of order, Ms. Gladue, then.
I just want to clarify. So when there's a motion, you can't call the vote until everybody who has their hands up gets a chance to speak, is my understanding, if you could just clarify. So Mr. Coteau has every right to continue.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I always do say that you bring a lot of clarity to this committee, and you know I've said that before, so I'm not just saying it because it's to my advantage at this moment.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Coteau. When we have a dilatory motion, it's not debatable. We move right away to the vote. And that's why I cut you off twice. This is a dilatory motion. I've asked for the clerk to call for the vote. I'm listening to the clerk. This is a dilatory motion. She has confirmed to me that it is.
And can I ask a question then, Mr. Chair? If it's 1 o'clock, can we adjourn?
Yes, we can. Sure, we
Yeah,
can.
it's 1 o'clock.
We're still dealing
we can
with
adjourn.
the motion. Genevieve,
It's
do you
1
want
o'clock
to
now.
clarify this? So it's a dilatory motion?
So that a dilatory motion, so the motion is to, a dilatory motion is to replace the subject at hand with another order of business. So the vote would not be on the motion itself. The vote is to resume debate on the motion. And that is a dilatory motion, which is not debatable and amendable.
We have to continue at this point? And since I have...
So being it is a dilatory motion, Mr. Coteau, we can vote on it right now or when we come back Thursday. The first item would be this motion to vote on. So as chair, I call for the vote and then we move on with
Point of order,
debate.
Mr. Chair, to move past the ascribed time for the committee, you need unanimous consent, which you do not have. So we're done.
We actually have 3 extra minutes. Mr. Norman.
Oh, now we have 3 extra
we've
minutes.
been
Great.
talking the whole
Oh, I see. Okay.
But I would like to call for the vote.
Point of order,
Move the
Mr. Chair.
debate. Yep.
We sit through countless hours of conversation. We had a situation where Mr. Champoux put forward a motion. There was an opportunity for the committee to work collaboratively to continue with questions. Sadly, that was not given to Mr. That was not given. We were not able to do that because some folks didn't feel that was appropriate. We then agreed as a group, through you, Mr. Chair, that each party remaining would get their 3 minutes.
Yep. Just the 2 parties.
So
yours and the
correct,
Conservatives.
correct. That we would do that. It would seem reasonable to a reasonable person that in an agreement such as that, crafted among people who I assume are honorable, that everyone would have their 3 minutes to do that work, given the time that has been given to us by these witnesses. It seems as though if that is the approach that the committee would like to take going forward, then certainly we will guard ourselves accordingly. But as Mr. Coteau very rightly said, we sit here in people that, with many on the other side whom we believe act in good faith, to be able to do that work. So this is now the second meeting in a row where this has happened, where knowing that there is an agreement to finish our time, Mr. Chair, that we would be afforded that opportunity. And both times, a motion has been dropped at the very last second, knowingly ensuring that we won't get our time. And so if that is the tone and the tenor and the approach we want to take to this committee, so be it. But that is a decision that is being made by the Conservatives, certainly not by us, and I would argue not by other members of other parties that are in this room.
Thank you. This is a motion. It's not debatable, though.
I move adjournment. And that has precedence. That has precedence.
It's also 103.
Yeah, he hasn't got the floor. So okay, so there's a motion on the floor. I'm going to call for the vote again.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, you don't have the unanimous consent of this committee to keep sitting past 103.
Yeah.
You do not. You don't have it from us.
can't
I don't
force
believe that you have
this.
it from Mr. Julian.
You have to respect the rules.
Fire away.
But it looks like everybody's leaving.
Okay.
So.
Do we get to thank these? Thank you for coming. And for those of you
I would like-
online
yeah, we
as well,
should
thank
thank-
you
yeah.
very
So
much.
I'm going to suspend, meaning on Thursday we'll pick this up.
No, you won't. You have a no, you won't. There's a motion to adjourn.
He hasn't
That
had the
takes
floor.
precedence.
You haven't had the floor.
Those are the rules.
No.
And if you want to pick this up when the minister is here instead of talking to the minister, that's your
So does
prerogative.
the committee agree to adjourn? Does the committee agree to adjourn?
We either vote to adjourn or you just adjourn the meeting because you don't have unanimous consent to continue. So those are the choices. And they both end up with adjournment unless you have unanimous consent to continue.
Committee, okay, chair says adjourn.